Please join me in welcoming Green Biz senior writer Heather Clancy.
Good morning. We have a great panel, lots of energy here for you for this morning. And it's actually a little bit ironic that I am the one introducing it because virtual reality is something that makes me feel a little woozy. We tend to think of it as a very media and entertainment-oriented medium, but it is an amazing storytelling medium, and it could be so impactful, immediate, and just amazing for what you're doing with your sustainability and environmental programs. Without further ado, I'd love to introduce Roy Talor with AMD and Noni de la Pena from Emblematic, and they're going to blow us away with how you could use virtual reality in your world and to communicate what you're doing to the rest of the world. Roy, go ahead.
Heather,
Why
you.
now?
Let me just kick off here. So thank you everybody for the chance to come along and talk to you. In 1895, Louis Lumiere took a sewing machine sprocket and added it to Thomas Edison's kinetoscope to create the cinematograph. And from that moment in 1895 until now, we've effectively looked through a window. We've been prisoners to somebody else's world vision. Whatever we've looked at, whether it's been through a PC monitor or through a tablet or through a smartphone, somebody else has created that, and we've been on the other side looking through. Virtual reality, for the first time, gives us a chance to step through that window and to look around and to see something which is larger and greater than the person who, until now, controlled what we watched and what we saw. And I believe that this is a very profound change, and that we haven't yet really begun to really understand the significance of this. It's going to change everything. I believe that VR isn't going to be a big thing, but it's going to be everything. It's going to change every single aspect of our lives. Simon Sinek said at his TED Talk that people will relate not to what you do, but to why you do it. And Tony Tsai, in his book, The Pursuit of Happiness, said that in order to be happy, that we should be doing something which is bigger than ourselves. I want to share with you that at AMD, we believe that we're not making chips, that we're not making CPUs and GPUs to sell, but we believe that virtual reality gives all of us at AMD the chance to be part of something bigger than ourselves, the chance to be able to enable this vision that we have for an immersive new world. And we're incredibly excited to be part of it. And we're working very, very hard to enable this new world. So every time I get a chance to come along and talk to you, it's very, very exciting for us because we love doing what we do so very, very much. According to John Petty Research, this year, AMD will power 83% of all VR experiences. That's a reflection of our passion for this new immersive technology. But where we are today compared to where we want to be, we've got quite some work to do. The current VR technology is around 2K of eye resolution with 10 milliseconds of latency, and it's about 8 teraflops of performance. To get to full immersion, the human visual system is about 576 megapixels. It needs around a petaflops of performance, 64 times where we are today with full HD. So we've got an awful lot of work to do. The exciting thing is we will get there. We will get to that point, hopefully sooner than later. Now, I mentioned that VR would change everything. In education, we're already seeing that at a time when we have record levels of ADHD, that VR holds exciting opportunities to help treat our children with ADHD. We're seeing that VR is already having an impact in terms of cognitive recognition and retention. I'm excited to tell you that we're already working with universities to recreate city landscapes, to recreate historical set pieces, to recreate interest from children in subjects that typically they may not have been interested in, whether it's geography or history or politics. And we are seeing that VR create excitement in children in ways that it didn't before. We're also seeing VR being used in medicine in new and exciting ways. The University of Virginia created something called Snow World, where listening to Paul Simon and throwing snowballs at penguins could be used for pain therapy. And they did some tests and showed that it really, really worked and was actually better than the treatment of drugs. At AMD, we're working with Dr. Skip Rizzo at USC to use VR to treat PTSD. In April in London, the world's first surgery took place in VR. The surgeon didn't wear a VR mask, but they recorded the VR and gave the ability to teach students, to give them the chance to be in the room with the surgeon during the treatment. This is why I mean the VR is so profound. It's touching so many different aspects of our lives. In journalism, we're starting to see that VR can give us the ability to see new aspects of a story. AMD has partnered with Associated Press to enable journalists to have access to VR, both to tell stories in VR and to explore stories in VR. Chris Milk used VR, went to Davos to show politicians and to highlight the plight of refugees in Syria. We believe that VR will give us the chance to understand and to empathize in ways that we couldn't before. And to explore some of that, it gives me a good chance to give an introduction to Noni and to some of Noni's work. Now, I'm going to show you a trailer of her work. I want to warn you that it's a little uncomfortable. It's a deliberate choice. VR does give us a chance to see the world through a different view. And so I apologize, a little uncomfortable, but it's deliberate. So what we'd like to do now is to roll the video, and then we'll go into the Q&A.
This is the story of those who remain. Our children, our sisters, our fathers have lived entire lives in war.
6 of them. It hits near us, it gets this sound of
So just as a kind of word to explain some of those pieces, Kia uses, all 3 of those pieces were attempts to get out to the world stories that are just not being heard. The first one actually was made in 2013 and went to the World Economic Forum to put people on scene in Syria to understand why people weren't able to go back to their homes. And you have to recreate it with real audio, real material, real archive. And I sent a team to Syria and Iraq to capture material. Actually, somebody who's just gone to Iraq yesterday to collect material for us, again, for forgotten communities. The second piece is actually being made in the Sudan mountains, in the Nuba Mountains, and it's an incredible story that is one of the longest running wars in the world, and it's been all but forgotten by the rest of the world. And we decided to focus on those who remain and how they're trying to still hang on to their lives. And the third piece, Kia, uses audio from 2 sisters who both called 911 to try to rescue, unsuccessfully, a fatal attack by an ex-boyfriend. And I intercut the 2 audio and with interviews with the sisters and photographs and FOIA. We were able to put you on scene at this moment because 3 women a day are killed by their intimate partners with guns. So 3 women a day. So all 3 of those pieces, all 3 of those stories were not ones readily understandable, accessible through traditional media. Now, I come from traditional media. I was a correspondent for Newsweek. I made many documentary films, but I was always teaching myself to code. I was always sort of that kind of person. So I then brought it together with virtual reality, actually about a piece on hunger. In January of 2012, we premiered at Sundance, and a piece I wanted to do about how people were going hungry in this country and they were invisible and food banks were overwhelmed. And we had no headset. All we had was this $50,000 headset. But there was a kid named Palmer Luckey kicking around, and he helped me build these 2 sets of goggles. We showed up with these crazy duct-taped things. But people were crying, weeping. It was the most astonishing thing. And then, 9 months later, he did the Kickstarter for Oculus Rift, 2.5 years, sold it for $2 billion. And the point I want to make here is that this was a piece about hunger that helped kickstart what has become a huge industry. So I'll leave it on that note.
That's what I wanted to key in. I want to get into the sort of production aspects in a moment, because if people are thinking about doing similar things, I want to know what they can expect. But what has been the impact of your work? And have you seen things change so far as a result of it, or are you just starting to get there?
So, here is the quandary that I find myself in as a journalist, right? You're not meant to go out and advocate and
Right.
see for the change, right? Or else you're not necessarily respected in communities and allowed access, right? So you have to be careful. That said, sometimes I feel like it's really unfair for what I put my audience through, because I've made a lot of people cry. And yet, then what do you do to offer the tools? And this is something that I sometimes currently battle with. I do collect data on people's reactions. I can say when we took Project Syria to the Victoria and Albert Museum, in June, they didn't advertise it, and it had a 5-day run. At the end of those 5 days, we had 54 pages of guest book comments. People just saying, I had no idea, I had no idea, I had no idea, except for my favorite comment, which was from a woman whose family was still in Syria, in which she said, at first I thought this was terrible, what were you doing? How could you do this? And then I tried it. And then I thought, please let your technology go further.
Have you seen other examples of work like Nani's? I mean, I'm just curious. I mean, obviously, you're very much in it. What other examples?
For me, actually, it's a very personal one. My mother contacted me a little while ago, and she said, Roy, will you get me a VR headset and a PC for Christmas? And I said, sure. When my mother's 72. I go, okay, Mum, but why? She said, well, in VR, I can be young again. And I suddenly thought, oh, wow. And actually, that made me realize that I think Mark Zuckerberg might actually be the brightest guy in the whole world, because the killer app for VR might not be an app at all, but might be social.
Mm-hmm. Almost certainly. I mean, we've seen, that's what people immediately started to do with technology, like World of Warcraft, right? We think of that as somebody in their basement in video games, but one of my favorite stories during the downturn was a guy who told me that, you play in groups, you play in teams, and from all over the world. And he could tell this guy had been playing with for like a year that he didn't know personally, said, with just his game was off. And he's like, what's going on? He said, well, I lost my job, and I don't know how I'm going to support my family. And this guy said, you know what? I have an opening. I've been playing with you for a year. I trust you. Come and interview for it. I won't even be in the room. And he interviewed it and got the job, and they've been working together for a year. So social is really interesting. I mean, the other story I have to say is, my son was in the living room with his computer open, and my daughter walked in from the garage office, and my son looked up and said, why did you leave? But she hadn't left, right? She just walked in the room. But what he meant was, why did you leave the Minecraft server we were both playing on together, right? So, this is right. What shared spaces are. They're just a little bit different than what we're used to, and this is only going to grow.
So I think that's, you brought up, young people a couple times. You brought up your mom. So I'm curious, what skills do you think are really necessary for people to become involved with VR? Curiosity, or does it have to be innate?
Yeah, I think as simple as curiosity and access. One of the things that does concern me is access. For VR to take off, we need as many people as possible to be able to get access to it. So I think that Sony with what they're going to do with the PlayStation is important. Oculus and HTC are important. But I'm a very keen advocate for what's called LBE, or location-based experiences. We need to get VR into movie theater lobbies, shopping malls, places where people go, so that more people can access it.
Nani, you brought up the Oculus example. So what does this stuff cost now? I mean, you had to make a pretty big initial investment. Is that, are you able to outfit more?
And I was so happy when I was able to get this huge motion capture system at a bankruptcy sale, right? Like, so this, I did, you know, you have to remember, for Hunger, I had $700 of my own money. I had no money to build these pieces when I first started. I was just committed to making them happen. Today, we're starting to see amazing headsets. I love the Vive headset. You know, it's $800, and you do have to have actually laptops for about $1,800 are running it now. So that's still a relatively high price point, about the same as your phone. We'll see what the Sony Morpheus does with, you know, 80 million headsets. 80 million PlayStation users out there. $300 add-on, right? So we've got that. Fantastic. And
that's to run it, right? So what about, I mean, that part in your case, to run it and to develop some. I'm curious, like, what do you need to really develop?
Oh, develop
these applications. Like, the people in this audience might think, ooh, how can I use
chips?
This? Good chips. That wasn't meant to be a plug for AMD, but
I'm going to have to.
Is,
I have
actually.
to because I can't do
it
my work.
It kind of is.
If you're going
what do you need to? So what are the people? What are the businesses in this room need to invest in order to create this kind of material to tell their stories?
Yeah, you would want to purchase a workstation, a Dell or HP workstation, and you'd need some professional software tools. So you would need to make an investment. You need to 3D Studio Max, Maya, those kind of tools to create the content.
And
pretty accessible.
For the walk around, which I think we both are the biggest fans of, because the reason why I like walk around virtual reality is because we experience the world that way. Like, you don't experience the world on a 2D screen that you can't ever get closer to, right? When you move forward to something, you should be able to move forward to something. That's how we experience the world, and that's why I like the walk around technologies. Typically, walk around technologies, you need to be able to put them in a game engine, like Unity or Unreal.
It's probably worth telling the audience that there's two clear types of VR, and I think sometimes people get confused. There's 360 VR, where you have multiple camera rigs, up to 24 cameras, up to 8K resolution. And the advantage of those is that the quality is very, very high because the camera's quality is very, very good. And now in that VR, which is typically what you get with the Samsung Gear, you can look around, but there's no interaction. At the time of when the camera when you capture it, it's cool. The other kind of VR is interactive, and that's based, as Noni says, on a game engine, either Unity or Unreal. Mm-hmm. That is the advantage of being interactive, but the quality isn't good. What we are going to see at some point in the near future is camera-based assets, or the quality of those, with the engine, and they'll come together. So we'll have kind of photorealistic images with interaction. That's going to come pretty soon.
Right, right. It's moving so fast. If you think that, you know, just, what is it, it's 2016, so 2012 is when I showed up at Sundance with duct tape goggles, and where we are today, with many, many, many artists interested, many organizations interested, educational, all kinds of practice that's coming to bear because the content affords, you know, a visceral understanding that just is unusual. Can I address your dizziness?
Yeah. I get so woozy, but I get woozy in real life. Not for nothing. I have motion sickness.
Because that is an issue, but the issue is something that if you're going to make content, the reason I brought it up is I would love to just say my #1 rule in all of this is you need, if you're going to shoot 360, you need to lock the camera off, because if the camera is moving in virtual reality, then your eyes are saying, I'm moving, but my body is saying, you're not moving anywhere. And that disconnect really contributes to the nausea as much as right now, because the latency is an issue for 360 videos.
Right.
So that's a huge one. But walking around when your body is moving and your body is controlling the camera, then I get a reduction of nausea reporting that's teensy-weensy fraction. So that's a really important note for anybody out here trying to do virtual reality. Please consider this. If you're going to go out and shoot 360, it is not a regular camera. You've got to think about, you let the action happen around the camera rather than try to make the camera go to the action. And that really, really will diminish any problems with your audience.
Elaine, we have time for one question from Sidebar.
Yes, so we are talking a little bit about physical challenges, health challenges, et cetera, but wondering how do you determine the point at which it's too much for people to experience war and other violent situations. So how does that impact us neurologically in terms of changing the way humans interact and functioning as a society as a result of really being so immersed in something so violent?
That's a great question. You know, one of the early demos that Oculus had was, I think, called Showdown. And it lasts 60 seconds, and it's in slow motion. And in it, you're in this kind of futuristic scene in a kind of New York street, and there's a robot, and there's bullets coming towards you. So I asked Brendan Aribi, the CEO of Oculus at the time, why is it in slow motion? Can I experience it in real time? And he said, no. So, well, why not? He said, well, first of all, it's only about 3 seconds long. He said, but second of all, every time we do that, you throw yourself to the floor. And I said, why? He said, well, it turns out being shot at when it feels real isn't actually fun at all. And I thought, oh. And so I think your question's a great one, because one of the things we might actually realize is violence actually isn't funny or fun at all. And this is where I think VR is so great, and why I'm such a big fan. I'm totally in love with Noni, because I think that I think we're going to learn to think about the world a little bit differently.
So I harken back to when in the 1960s when we used to send images from Vietnam into living rooms at 6 p.m. But on the other hand, at 9 p.m. At Newsnight in England, I saw much more intense stuff about Syria than I ever saw on U.S. television. So it's a really interesting balance about how do we offer audiences information that helps them understand their world, and yet how do we be respectful of exactly those issues. In Kia, we certainly could have shown you, recreated the actual interior of where the individuals were killed. We don't do that. We're never on scene there. So we do go back to what has been since the 1960s, right? So 50 plus years of good journalism practice and thinking about this, and we use that information to inform how we build those pieces in order to make sure that we create something that we aren't, just being graphic for the sake of being graphic.
I think that is a really great place to leave this. The social implications are just tremendous, as are the technical implications, right? There is a panel later today after lunch that will take this deeper. It's called Your Brain on Virtual Reality. Great place. And so hopefully a lot of you will be able to explore that later. Please thank Roy Talor and Nani de la Peña for being here today and getting you thinking about this in a totally different way.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.